What made a respected cowboy walk into a lonely widow's bakery one evening and ask a question that left an entire town speechless? The church doors creaked open as Ivy froze halfway down the aisle, her fingers tightening around a pair of worn gloves. Outside, wagon wheels rattled across the muddy street. Inside, dozens of eyes followed her every step. Then a deep voice broke the silence from the back row. A cowboy stood there, hat in hand, looking straight at her. And what happened next made the room go completely still. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and join us for more unforgettable Western love stories. Spring arrived slowly in Elk Pass. The snow still clung to the distant peaks, glowing pale pink in the early morning light, while muddy wagon tracks cut through the main street below. Most people were still asleep when Ivy Brooks unlocked the door to her bakery. The bell above the door gave its usual soft jingle. She hung her apron on its hook, tied it around her waist, and lit the lamps one by one. Soon the room filled with the smell of yeast, cinnamon, and fresh coffee. By sunrise, the first customers began arriving. A ranch hand bought 2 biscuits. A stagecoach driver grabbed a cup of coffee before heading north. A young woman entered with a diamond ring sparkling on her finger. "Got engaged Sunday," she told another customer. The women laughed and admired the ring. Ivy smiled politely and returned to kneading dough. Nobody asked her opinion. Nobody ever did. 30. The number had followed her for weeks. She heard it at church. She heard it at the mercantile. She heard it whispered by women who thought she couldn't hear. Too old. Too settled. Too late. As if a woman's life came with an expiration date. Late that morning, Ivy carried a tray of peach turnovers to the front counter. 2 women stood near the window. "Such a shame," one of them said. The other glanced toward Ivy. "Well, not everyone gets a second chance." Their voices dropped. Not enough. Ivy pretended not to notice. That had become a useful skill. Outside, wagon wheels rattled across the street. Inside, she focused on the simple things. The weight of flour, the warmth of the ovens, the scratch of pencil against the receipt book. Facts were easier than feelings. Near noon, the bell above the door rang again. She looked up. Luke Callahan stepped inside. Dust covered his boots. A tan coat hung from his broad shoulders. He removed his hat and nodded once. The same way he always did. "Morning, Miss Brooks." "Morning, Mr. Callahan." He usually bought coffee and left. Today he ordered coffee, then a slice of apple pie. Then, surprisingly, he sat down. Ivy noticed it immediately. Most customers came and went. Luke remained. The bakery was nearly empty. Outside, the wind pushed through the cottonwoods near the creek. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Luke glanced toward the mountains. "Snow's melting early. It usually means a wet summer." "You think so?" "I've seen it happen before." He nodded. Not because he was being polite. Because he was actually listening. The conversation moved slowly after that. Weather. Cattle prices. The new trail north. Nothing remarkable. Yet Ivy found herself talking more than she intended, and Luke kept listening. No interruptions, no pity, no careful sympathy reserved for widows, just attention. When he finally stood, the coffee had long gone cold. "Appreciate the company," he said. The words caught her slightly off guard. "You're welcome." He placed coins beside the empty plate, tipped his hat, then left. The bell jingled. The door closed. Silence returned. An hour later, while wiping tables, Ivy noticed something near the chair where Luke had been sitting. A white handkerchief, folded neatly. She picked it up. The fabric was clean and expensive. One corner carried carefully stitched initials. MC, not Luke's initials. She ran her thumb across the embroidery. A mother's keepsake, perhaps. Something old. Something personal. Something a man like Luke Callahan would never carelessly lose. Outside, his horse was long gone. Ivy stood alone beside the window, the handkerchief resting in her hands, and for reasons she could not explain, she found herself wondering when he might come back for it. The answer came 2 days later. A spring rain had passed through Elk Pass during the night, leaving puddles along Main Street and dark streaks of mud beneath wagon wheels. Ivy was arranging fresh blackberry muffins in the display case when the bell above the door rang. Luke Callahan stepped inside. His hat carried droplets of rain. His eyes went immediately to the handkerchief folded beside the register. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ivy picked it up. "I believe this belongs to you." Luke looked at it and gave the smallest smile. "It does." She waited for an explanation. None came. He simply accepted it and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Thank you." That should have been the end of it. Instead, he bought coffee and sat down again. The same table, the same chair, the same quiet presence. By the end of the week, it had become a pattern. Sometimes he brought cuts of beef from Double Creek Ranch. Sometimes Ivy packed peach pies or fresh bread in exchange. No bargaining, no games. Just two people finding reasons to continue a conversation. The town noticed. Elk Pass noticed everything. One evening, 12-year-old Caleb Turner appeared outside the bakery carrying a sack of flour nearly as large as he was. Luke had sent him. The boy could barely read the receipt. Ivy discovered that quickly. So after closing time, she sat him at a corner table beneath a lamp and showed him how letters formed words. Caleb struggled through the first page, then the second. His face lit up when he finally read an entire sentence without help. The following evening he returned, and the evening after that. Soon, teaching Caleb became part of Ivy's routine. The bakery stayed warm long after sunset, while the boy sounded out words from an old school book. Across town, the whispers grew louder. Women lowered their voices when Ivy entered church. Men glanced toward Luke whenever he stepped into the saloon. One Saturday night, Luke walked into Murphy's Tavern and found Owen Briggs waiting with a grin. The wealthy rancher leaned back in his chair. "Heard you've been spending a lot of time in town?" A few men chuckled. Luke ordered coffee. Nothing else. Owen continued. "Careful. Folks might think you're serious." More laughter. Luke set a coin on the counter. "Folks can think whatever they like." The room grew quieter. Owen smirked. "My money says you'll be courting some pretty young schoolteacher by summer's end." Luke picked up his cup. "Keep your money." Then he walked away. The story reached Ivy before sunset the next day. Martha Green delivered it while buying cinnamon rolls. "People need hobbies," Martha muttered. Ivy forced a smile, but something unsettled her. Hope had a dangerous way of arriving quietly. A week later, a different visitor came. A man in a gray suit carrying a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as a representative of Price Transportation Company. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When he left, a folded document remained on the counter. Ivy read it once, then again. The words did not change. The property containing her bakery had been sold. Ownership would transfer to Ezekiel Price's company. Current tenants were required to vacate within 90 days. 90 days. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. Outside, wagon wheels rolled past. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life continued exactly as before. Inside the bakery, everything felt different. That evening, Caleb arrived for his reading lesson. Luke stopped by for coffee. Martha came for bread. Ivy smiled at all of them and told none of them the truth. After they left, She locked the door and sat alone beside the cooling ovens. The notice lay open on the table. 90 days. For the first time in years, she had no idea what came next. The notice stayed hidden beneath a stack of flour invoices inside the bakery office. Every morning, Ivy unlocked the front door before sunrise. Every morning, she told herself she would find a solution. And every evening, she locked the door carrying the same unanswered problem. 90 days. The number followed her everywhere. She began making quiet inquiries around town. A ranch hand looking for a small investment. A retired merchant. A traveling family passing through. No one wanted the bakery. Some thought the location would soon belong to Price Transportation anyway. Others simply didn't want the risk. Weeks passed. The spring grass grew taller across the valley. Snow retreated farther up the mountains. And Elk Pass continued talking. Luke still visited. Not every day. Just often enough that Ivy noticed when he didn't. One afternoon he arrived with a broken fence ledger tucked beneath his arm. Caleb followed behind carrying a sack of oats. The boy proudly read an entire newspaper headline aloud before stumbling over the next sentence. Luke looked almost as pleased as Caleb. "He's improving." Ivy smiled. "He works hard." Luke nodded. "So do you." The words lingered after he left. Simple words, yet somehow harder to forget than compliments. By midsummer, Elk Pass was preparing for the annual cattle festival. Ranchers filled the streets. Wagons crowded every available space. The smell of dust, horses, roasting meat, and fresh-cut hay drifted through town. For a few days, business at the bakery was better than it had been all year. Then everything changed in a single afternoon. Ivy was crossing the fairgrounds carrying 2 pie boxes when laughter erupted nearby. At first she ignored it. Then she heard her name. A group of townspeople stood near the livestock pens. Not cruel people, not enemies, just people who believed they were being funny. One woman shook her head dramatically. 30 years old already!" Another laughed. "At this rate, she'll marry the bakery oven." More laughter followed. Someone added that the town's bachelors were looking for brides, not responsibilities. The words floated across the crowd. Light, casual, careless. Yet they landed heavily. Ivy kept walking. She did not stop. She did not respond. But her grip tightened on the pie boxes. Across the fairgrounds, Luke saw everything. His expression never changed. He simply watched until the laughter faded. That evening, the bakery closed early. The last customer left just before sunset. The sky beyond the windows glowed orange and gold. Ivy was wiping down a table when the bell above the door rang. Luke stepped inside. Neither spoke immediately. The room smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Outside, wagon wheels rattled along the road. Inside, only silence remained. Luke removed his hat. "I heard what happened today." Ivy continued wiping the table. It wasn't important. It was. She stopped moving. For several moments, neither said another word. Then Luke looked around the small bakery, the worn floorboards, the display case, the ovens, the life she had built with her own hands. "You don't have to leave town." She lowered the rag. "That's not my decision anymore. Come work at Double Creek." The offer surprised her. She looked up. Luke's face remained calm. "You could manage supplies, help with accounts, teach Caleb." Ivy shook her head. "No." "Why?" "Because eventually I'll still have to leave." Luke studied her quietly. Then he sat at the nearest table, the same table he always chose. The evening light stretched across the floor between them. Finally, he spoke again. "Then marry me." The words landed softly, almost gently. yet they struck harder than thunder. Ivy stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. The room seemed suddenly very still. Even the sounds from the street felt distant. "What?" Luke met her eyes. "Marry me." No speech, no flowers, no rehearsed declaration. Just a simple statement spoken by a man who rarely wasted words. Ivy slowly sat down across from him. Her heartbeat felt louder than the ticking clock near the kitchen door. "Luke," he waited, "do you love me?" For the first time since she had known him, uncertainty crossed his face. His gaze shifted toward the window, toward the fading sunlight. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet. "I know. I don't want to see you leave." The silence that followed felt endless. Outside, a horse passed along Main Street. Inside, neither moved, neither looked away, and neither knew what would happen next. For 3 days, Ivy gave Luke no answer. Life in Elk Pass continued as if nothing had happened. The bakery opened before dawn. Wagons rolled along Main Street. Cattle dust drifted over the valley every afternoon. Yet beneath the routine, everything felt different. The proposal sat between them like an unopened letter. On the 4th evening, Luke returned. He stood outside the bakery while the last light faded behind the mountains. When Ivy unlocked the door to leave, she found him waiting beside the hitching rail. Neither spoke immediately. The spring wind tugged at the brim of his hat. Finally, Ivy looked at him. "You still haven't taken back your proposal." Luke's answer came without hesitation. "No." She lowered her eyes briefly. Then she nodded. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but it changed both of their lives. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later inside the little white church near Cottonwood Creek. No orchestra, no elaborate decorations. Only a handful of townspeople filled the wooden pews. Martha Green sat in the front row. Caleb looked nervous enough for everyone. Sheriff Walter Dunn stood near the entrance. Even Owen Briggs attended, though his expression suggested he would rather have been anywhere else. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. When it ended, Luke offered Ivy his arm. Nothing more. Nothing less. The respect in that simple gesture was noticed by everyone present. By sunset, Ivy was riding beside him toward Double Creek Ranch. The ranch sat several miles north of town, where rolling grasslands met the foothills. The main house overlooked a shallow creek that reflected the evening sky. A weathered barn stood nearby. Windmills turned slowly in the distance. It was not grand, but it felt steady. The first weeks passed quietly. Luke never rushed her, never demanded closeness, never acted as though marriage gave him ownership over her life. Instead, he paid attention to details. Each morning, a chair was already pulled out for her at breakfast. When she returned late from town, a lantern always glowed on the porch. One afternoon, she discovered a chestnut mare waiting in the corral. A calm horse with patient eyes. Caleb proudly announced that Luke had spent months training her. Luke pretended not to hear. Ivy smiled anyway. Summer slowly gave way to autumn. The old bakery equipment was moved to a building near the ranch entrance. Soon, ranch hands stopped by for fresh bread before sunrise. Travelers bought pies while passing through the valley. Business grew. So did something neither of them spoke about. Comfort. One chilly evening, Ivy carried a tray of biscuits onto the porch. Luke sat repairing a leather bridle. The sunset painted the mountains gold. For a long moment, they watched the valley together. No conversation. No need. The silence felt easy, like home. Then winter arrived. Snow covered the high ridges. Cold winds swept across the open range. The cattle drive north could not be delayed. Luke left with several ranch hands to move a herd before the mountain passes closed. Before dawn on the morning of departure, Ivy handed him a cloth bundle filled with food, biscuits, dried apples, a small jar of preserves. Luke accepted it carefully. Their fingers brushed for only a second. "Be careful," she said. "I will." Then he rode away. The storm arrived 3 days later, a powerful mountain blizzard. Visibility disappeared. Roads vanished beneath drifting snow. At Double Creek Ranch, Ivy stood by the window long after dark. The lantern remained burning on the porch. Waiting. The first search party left at sunrise. The second followed the next day. Each returned carrying the same answer. Nothing. No sign of Luke. No tracks. No horse. No camp. Only snow and wind. By the fourth day, whispers spread through Elk Pass. People spoke softly when Ivy entered a room. Men removed their hats. Women lowered their voices. Even Sheriff Dunn avoided her eyes. Late that afternoon, a final search group returned to town. Their horses looked exhausted. Snow clung to coats and saddles. The men dismounted silently. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke. Ivy already understood before they reached her. Caleb stood nearby, clutching the fence rail so tightly his knuckles turned white. The search leader removed his hat. "We couldn't find him." The words seemed to disappear into the cold air. Behind them, snow drifted across Main Street. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. And for the first time since agreeing to marry Luke Callahan, Ivy felt the ground beneath her future begin to disappear. The storm lingered over Elk Pass for 2 more days. Snow piled against fences. Wagon traffic nearly stopped. The mountains vanished behind curtains of white. Most people accepted what seemed obvious. A rider lost in a blizzard that long rarely returned. But Ivy refused to say the words aloud. She continued waking before dawn. She still lit the kitchen stove, still poured coffee into Luke's favorite tin cup, still left the porch lantern burning each evening. On the 6th day, she saddled the chestnut mare Luke had given her. Caleb tried to stop her. So did the sheriff. "I know. They couldn't find him." She adjusted her gloves. "Then they weren't looking where I am." The boy stared at her, then quietly reached into the barn and handed her an extra blanket. Neither mentioned tears. For the next several days, Ivy joined every search. She rode narrow trails above the valley, checked abandoned trapper shelters, visited hunting cabins hidden among the pines. The cold cut through her coat. Snow filled her boots. Still, she kept going. Something had changed. The opinions of Elk Pass no longer mattered. Not the whispers. Not the laughter. Not the judgments. Only Luke mattered. Late one afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the storm began, a ranch hand spotted smoke rising from a forgotten hunting cabin high in the mountains. The search party changed direction immediately. By sunset, they found him. Alive. Weak. Exhausted. But alive. His horse had slipped near a rocky slope during the storm. After wandering through blinding snow, Luke had reached the abandoned cabin and survived on stored firewood and the food Ivy had packed for him. When they brought him home, the entire town seemed to breathe again. Caleb nearly tackled him off the wagon. Martha cried openly. Even Sheriff Dunn smiled. Luke recovered slowly. For several weeks, he remained close to the ranch house. The doctor ordered rest. Luke ignored most of that advice, but he obeyed enough to keep Ivy from worrying too much. One snowy afternoon, while reviewing old ranch records in the office, Luke noticed irregular land filings attached to recent property transfers. The signatures looked wrong. Dates didn't match. Several neighboring ranch owners had supposedly agreed to sales they never remembered making. The trail led directly to Ezekiel Price. At first, nobody wanted to believe it. Price owned the largest freight company in the region. His wagons supplied half the territory, but evidence continued appearing. Then Ivy found something unexpected. While delivering bread to one of Price's storage buildings, she noticed an abandoned ledger tucked behind shipping crates. The book contained transaction records, property numbers, false agreements, forged transfers. Enough to expose everything. A town meeting was called inside the church hall. Every bench was filled. Ranchers stood along the walls. Snow melted from boots onto the wooden floor. Ezekiel Price arrived looking confident. He believed no one would challenge him publicly, especially not Ivy. For years, she had avoided attention, avoided confrontation, avoided becoming the center of any room. But when Sheriff Dunn asked for evidence, she stepped forward. The hall became silent. She placed the ledger on the table, then calmly explained what she had found. Page by page, record by record. No speeches, no anger, just facts. The room slowly turned against Price. Questions followed, then accusations. By the end of the meeting, his influence had collapsed. The land claims were revoked. Investigations began immediately. For the first time in years, Elk Pass saw Ivy differently. Not because of who she married, because of who she was. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Luke found her standing beside the pasture fence overlooking the snow-covered valley. The sky glowed purple beneath the last light of day. Neither spoke for a while. The wind moved softly through the grass poking above the snow. Finally, Luke stepped closer. "I should have said something sooner." Ivy looked toward him. "Said what?" His hands rested on the fence rail. The same hands that had built barns, repaired fences, and carried responsibilities most men avoided. Yet now they seemed uncertain. "I loved you before I asked you to marry me." The words settled gently between them. No audience, no applause, no witnesses. Only the fading light. Luke smiled faintly. "Long before." For a moment, Ivy couldn't answer. Then she laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because the truth felt almost unbelievable. After all the years she had spent feeling invisible, someone had been seeing her all along. Weeks later, while organizing a drawer inside the ranch house, Ivy discovered an old handkerchief. White linen. The initials MC. Luke's mother's handkerchief. The one he had supposedly forgotten in the bakery months ago. That evening, she carried it onto the porch. Luke looked at it and immediately knew. A guilty smile appeared. "You didn't lose it, did you?" He looked out across the pasture. "No. You left it there." A longer silence followed. Then he nodded. "I needed a reason to come back." Ivy shook her head. For all his strength, he had been that nervous, and somehow that made her love him even more. The following spring arrived warm and green. Wildflowers covered the valley. Double Creek Ranch seemed brighter than ever. The bakery beside the ranch entrance had expanded. Travelers stopped daily. Ranch hands lined up before sunrise. One afternoon, a young couple entered together. The woman glanced around before smiling at Ivy. "Is it true what people say?" Ivy looked up from the dough she was kneading. "What do they say?" The young woman smiled. "That you found love after 30. For a second, Ivy looked through the front window. Across the pasture, Luke guided a horse through the golden grass. Sunlight caught the brim of his hat. He glanced toward the bakery as if he somehow knew she was watching. Ivy smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. Then she returned to her work. Outside, hoofbeats drifted across the valley. Inside, fresh bread baked in the oven. And for the first time in many years, the place where she stood no longer felt like somewhere she was trying to hold on to. It felt like home. Maybe that's why this story stays with us long after the last scene fades. Because deep down, many of us know what it feels like to wait, to wonder if life has already passed us by, to watch other people move forward while we quietly carry our own disappointments, our own unanswered hopes, and the fear that what we're looking for may never come. If you had been standing where Ivy stood, hearing the whispers, carrying the weight of lonely years, would you have kept believing there was still something beautiful ahead? What makes her story special isn't that someone rescued her. It's that she never stopped showing up for her life. She opened the bakery every morning. She kept working, kept caring, kept choosing dignity when bitterness would have been easier. And in the end, love arrived not with grand promises, but through small acts of kindness repeated over time. Sometimes the people who truly see our worth are already walking quietly beside us long before we notice. Maybe that's the lesson hidden between the mountains, the snowfall, and the warm light of that bakery window. Healing often comes slowly. Second chances rarely arrive the way we expect. And the right kind of love doesn't ask us to become someone else. It simply reminds us that we were worthy all along. If this story touched something in your heart, tell us in the comments. Do you believe it's ever too late to find love? And if you'd like, stay a while. There are more stories waiting just beyond the next trail. Stories of hope, resilience, mystery, and the unexpected ways people find their way home.